So this is sort of what I had in mind at the beginning when I thought about educational simplicity, and it really kind of boiling down to love and play. And research on child development and social neuroscience and interpersonal neurobiology, they really boil down to love and play, and that fosters all lines of development. But the complication is that loving your children is not the same as them feeling loved, right? And all parents love their children, but not all children are securely attached. And secure attachment is actually potentially the most important factor in human development. So children need to be securely attached to their caregivers. They need to feel safe, to be comforted, so that they can process emotions, so that they can explore and create and learn and change. And that needs to be carried over not just in terms of what's happening in the first few years with parents, but when we're thinking about early childhood, it needs to be carried over into how we're thinking about early childhood education. Children and teachers at that young age need to also have the same dynamic of secure attachment, where teachers can be an emotional, supportive comfort and not just somebody who's trying to put content into the child's brain, right? So there's a difference between just loving children and actually doing what's necessary to actually help them develop secure attachment so they can be in a place to keep changing and evolving as they get older. And similarly with play, right? We don't want to fall into the simple idea, well, just let kids do whatever they want all the time and let them play all the time. That can be framed as sort of a cognitive maturity fallacy, where we think that they are mature enough to make all their own decisions about what they should be doing. And that's not the case at all, right? Children need guidance, and children need adults who are adults and are attuned to them and are in right relationship with them and know what they need as an individual on their next step. So it's not just all play all the time, right? Malcolm Gladwell in his book Outliers talks about this notion of concerted cultivation and how you see these really disparate parenting styles where some parents are just really hands-off and let their kids do whatever they want, and other parents are much more hands-on and engaged. And so he makes this distinction between positive entitlement and negative entitlement. So entitlement is a problem if we're sort of not holding the natural hierarchy between adults and children and letting kids sort of be entitled to think that they can do whatever they want all the time. That's not healthy. But we actually want to cultivate a sort of positive entitlement where they are learning to interface with the world. They're learning that they are autonomous actors who are unique and independent from their parents and their teachers, who have their own ideas, who are listened to, and who are engaged in relationships where they're taken seriously and they're allowed to just be their own person and really getting authentic, responsive feedback from adults and from their environment to sort of help them on their way, right? So it's really trying to find that middle path in terms of control versus free play. It doesn't need to be either extreme. So when we're thinking about schools, what are the things that we should be looking for to kind of bring together some of the things that we should be that we've been talking about? We want schools that have a holistic view of development, right, and respect neurodiversity, respect natural diversity, not treat difference as a deficiency. We want schools that really honor the sacred individuality of each child. Standardization is one of the biggest problems that we face, and thinking that there's set benchmarks as though every child at a certain age should be doing the same thing at the same time. It just doesn't make any sense, and it will never happen. All you're doing is giving some kids really unnecessary negative feedback and having other kids think that just because they're just naturally decoding faster or whatever, that they're the smart ones. And it's actually destructive on both ends of that spectrum. So we just don't want to fall into that. We want to respect each child as an individual and have relationships where we can be attuned enough to them to give them what they need as individuals in the context of a secure and loving group. Which leads us to thinking about tribal classrooms. The reason we call them tribal classrooms is because we're connecting to our evolutionary history, right? We're connecting to the fact that throughout time, people have been raised in multi-group, multi-age groups with multiple adults who care for them, children of different ages. Everyone has strengths and weaknesses. Everyone is an individual, but there are deep bonds. There's deep trust and meaningful relationships, right? So we want, ideally, a school will be an extension of that, an extension of the family, and a place where the relationships are real and deep and trusting, and children are not overly standardized and not just stuck with kids of their own age, but to have interactions across ages where sometimes they're the leader and maybe the older one, sometimes they're the younger one and they're learning from older kids. So there's a real developmental logic to multi-age classrooms, or at least fostering relationships across ages, and not just having a dynamic where it's like one adult telling all the little people what to do, but something just more collaborative and more a context for emergence where ideas can emerge from the group, right? And ideas and insights and learning can emerge from the relationships of that group and not just a transmission of knowledge from the adult to the children. So that goes hand in hand with developmental timing and having a sense of what's developmentally appropriate and being responsive to not rushing kids, but also not letting kids fall behind. And a post-conventional culture might be one of the most important things. What I mean by that is more what I was talking about in terms of, getting beyond the norms of modern society and postmodern society and kind of the way that things are, but really helping children orient themselves to the world so that their orientation is to make the world a better place, as opposed to simply being successful in the world as it is, right? The underlying sort of assumption of a lot of educational contexts is that we're preparing children to be successful in the world. And what I'm arguing is that that is a mistaken and an anachronistic goal, right? We need to be helping our children be oriented to the world so that they are prepared to make the world better and to transform the world, because the way that things are now are about to break down, and it's not going to continue the way it is. We need them to actually be oriented toward the good and not just towards some conventional notion of success, but actually being post-conventional, being able to criticize and reflect on the way that things are so they can keep the evolutionary process moving forward. And we need schools that nurture that complexity and do not succumb to reductionism in any of these ways. So as adults, what I'm getting to, and just to kind of cycle back and review a little bit, getting us to reflect on our values that relate to education in light of what we know about a broader context of evolutionary and developmental unfolding, right? So modern values are not necessarily bad or wrong, but they are now inadequate for our context in a postmodern leading to a post-postmodern world. And we need to remember that when we're thinking about how success is framed in schools and society, that the social, cultural, economic, and climate crises all continue to be perpetuated by the graduates of our top universities, right? Something is off there. And economic crashes are in part the result of greed and incompetence of our best test takers, right? So getting good grades, going to a good college should not be the goal of parenting or education. That's actually part of the problem. And we need to see that really clearly so that we can help our kids see that really clearly, so that by the time they're getting through high school, they can actually already be developing post-conventional values and a post-conventional relationship to the world, so that they're oriented to their own sacred individuality and what their own path is for making the world a better place, right? More people trying to be successful is only going to exacerbate the big wicked problems that we talked about at the beginning. And the sort of foundations of meritocracy and individualism remain the default meta theory for much of education in modern society. So that's why we need to be looking at that and thinking about that and reflecting on that, and not just unconsciously perpetuating that. Because it's just no longer good enough to be looking through those modern values at the world. And it's also, to sort of raise the stakes even more, it's no longer good enough either to just critique and criticize, right? We can't just be postmodern critics who are frustrated with modernity and capitalism. We have to actually try to reconstruct a postmodern society based on research-based principles and beyond partisan polarities and binaries, right? So the answers of either political binary right now are not adequate to the complexity that's needed to bring to these social problems.